And I mean, looking ahead to 2025, Mike Clay, if we're going to look at some rankings here, when you look at the top of the 2025 rankings, given where we're at, you've already got your way too early.
Yeah, I did a first run last week, and then I updated them yesterday and sent them out, so we're going to talk about them here now and on Sunday on FF Now. Yeah, I mean, look, it's really early here. Some of these are tougher to sort out than others. Some are easy, some are hard, and will depend on landing spots, coaching, all those sort of things. But especially certain areas, as we're about to get to. But yeah, I put together. 10. I actually, believe it or not, right now here, I'm holding a 2025 rankings cheat sheet. So I have it. It's pretty, wow. It's pretty deal. I was kind of excited to print this out because I'm like, man, this is like, you got to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere. Some people be like, why are you wasting your time? You have to have a starting point, and then you continue to move these guys around. So yeah, it's kind of exciting to get that first look at what drafts will look like next season.
Is it true that you're going to have Ja'Marr Chase all the way at the top because of the fact that right now he's third in total fantasy points ahead of almost every other quarterback that's out there today?
Yeah, and part of that is what you do at running back, and if there's a clear-cut number one, which some people are like, oh, there is. It's Saquon Barkley, but we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, I think Chase right now, based on what the damage he's done this season and his outlook for next year, which is still with Joe Burrow, and we'll see on T. Higgins, but they love to throw the ball in that offense, and even if they balance that out a little bit more, Ja'Marr Chase is the real deal, heavily featured, great connection with Joe Burrow. Just feels like an easy first overall pick to me next year.
I think that next year, though, on paper, strikes me as the one where we're going to have the most thoughtful discourse about player that could go number one overall.
Yeah, there's definitely candidates.
I would say of those 10 players, I don't have a major gripe with anything that Mike wrote there.
Those 10 players, just so that we can listen for the people listening at home, we got Ja'Marr Chase at 1, Bijan at 2, Justin Jefferson at 3, Saquon at 4, and Jahmyr Gibbs rounds out the top 5, 6 through 10. Mike has Amon-Ra, Puka Nacua, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, and Nico Collins as top 10 for next season.
My contention would be that 5 players, but not the first 5 in Mike's order, may generate some player 1 overall buzz. Ja'Marr Chase, I think, is the leading favorite.
Definitely.
I think Bijan is probably second in that order. And then I think it's Justin Jefferson, Saquon Barkley because of what he did this year. And then I think Puka will also get some hype as well. Because if you look on the per-game basis, Puka, and I know you can't really do this, but take away the game he got injured, take away the game in which he fought somebody, and Puka's going to be there.
I mean, you kind of like that about him, right?
Yeah.
He fought someone.
Yeah. If you take away those 2 games, I think he's like a tenth of a point ahead of or behind Ja'Marr Chase.
Yeah.
The reason why I think Jahmyr Gibbs won't get that same conversation is just because David Montgomery, right? You're going to look at the games in which Monty was healthy, and you're going to see the consistency of Jahmyr Gibbs, which is 70-plus scrimmage yards in every game played this season. But you're also going to see the weeks in which there was the stat that we had going for a while where he was the only player with at least 12 fantasy points in every game amongst non-quarterbacks. And then it was like, but how many of those weeks was he like running back 1 through 5?
Yeah, it's like Kamara or Matt Forte kind of vibe where it's like, I'll finish 4th, but not first, which is great. But honestly, when you're picking a player in the first round, I'd be fine. Like, it's almost like I'm just taking Gibbs 1 because I know I'm getting that top 5 seed. Like, it's almost like that's okay. You're not gonna. You just don't want to lose in the first round. You don't want to. I agree. And not wanting to lose it with your first round pick is why Saquon Barkley is 4 and not 1 here. Look. I know I'm gonna get into this in the offseason. I'll give you a couple early numbers on this to give an idea and kind of start the conversation. We're going to talk about this a lot in the offseason. But he has 378 touches. He's not going to play in Week 18. Still has 378 touches. That's 12th most among running backs since 2011. That is a big workload. 24 running backs who had at least 350 and played the next season. So I crossed off Le'Veon Bell because he didn't play the next season. Averaged 11.3 games the next season. Yeah. The 21 who played at least 6 games averaged a drop-off of 4.8 fantasy points. Only 2 of 20 increased their points per game. Derrick Henry, who's a unicorn, and Matt Forte did when he was earlier in his career. None of those 24 running backs that had all those touches finished first or second fantasy points the next year. Only 3 were top 5. Only 7 were top 10 the next season. This is a real thing. That heavy volume is almost impossible to repeat the next season at a high level. And it's just, you can pick apart all these guys. And again, we're going to do it all off season.
Right.
But I am really concerned about this at Barkley going into his age 28 season. Yeah, it's a real concern for me.
I'd be surprised if the efficiency dropped dramatically for Saquon. I am just concerned about injury, which is probably something that applies to all players. And the only reason why I say that is I think about some of the guys that fit into that category of 350-plus or more touches. And sometimes the efficiency dropped because it was like Josh Jacobs on the Raiders. right? Where it's like you're playing in a bad ecosystem. The ecosystem is so ideal for Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, for that matter, to repeats. Henry is a different risk because while he is maybe one of one in terms of physical fitness, he is also at a different age bracket than Saquon Barkley. He's got him by a few years in the NFL. But yeah, save this thought. And it's probably going to go by the wayside within like 6 weeks. But I'm starting to feel this stronger and stronger as I get further into my draft analyst career on the Real Draft front at ESPN. Is that last year I remember having some spirited conversations with people about certain players in the draft, because there was a time in which it was like, should Brock Bowers go like 4th overall in the real NFL draft? Like, does he deserve conversation for the Chargers at 5th overall last year when they took Joe Alt instead? And it was like, well, no, you can't use a top 15 pick on a guy like that who, plays a position where the NFL does not value it at the same level. And it's like a year into that conversation, what I realized is that, like, on the great players, just don't waste that much energy on it. Saquon's a risk because he can get hurt and because of what Mike just laid out from an efficiency standpoint. I'm going to try to be a bit more passionate about the guys that I have, like, 21st versus 31st than I do the 4th versus 7th. I love Puka Nacua. I love Saquon Barkley. I'm going to be fine with either of those guys in round 1 next year.
I love Jahmyr Gibbs for what it's worth, and the idea that Jahmyr Gibbs has 16 touches this year. I didn't have that on my bingo card. If you told me there was a Lions running back with 16 touchdowns, I would have been like, oh, David Montgomery found the end zone a bunch. I could totally see that coming. But instead, both of them just have double-digit touchdowns. The thing that I love about Jahmyr, out of these other guys, for me, is just the fact that he's a top 10 running back even with David Montgomery. But if anything happens to his backfield mate, he vaults up to a top 3 guy pretty easily, which is...
It's almost like he's got the anti-Devon Achane factor working for him, right? It's like, if things are normal, this guy's a top 10 back. But if, like, a factor that has come into play in each of this player's first 2 seasons comes into play, Jahmyr Gibbs goes from, like, RB8 to RB, like, 1 by himself, whereas, like, Devon Achane goes from, like, RB5 to, like, RB20 if Tua's not available.
That's crazy.
I'm with you for sure. Like that they're both used as a rusher and a receiver as well for Gibbs, and I think that applies to Robinson too. Who the reason he's ahead of Barkley is that, first of all, he's been awesome the last couple of months. More involved, but now this hasn't been the case the last month. His receiving has dropped off, but we know what he's capable of in the passing game as well for Atlanta, and also he's going to be 5 years younger than Saquon Barkley, so. I feel like he's more likely to build on what he's done this season, whereas Barkley might be hard to repeat. And by the way, Robinson, his touch total, not going to be far off Barkley after this week, assuming he plays which he will. They're going all out for a win. Not going to be far off. So that's a little bit of a concern as well. But again, I'm going to have no issue going wide receiver in round 1. You shouldn't, especially with a guy like Chase or Jefferson or Amon-Ra. I mean, CeeDee Lamb was a candidate for 1st overall this year, and he's sitting there at 8. I mean, Malik Neighbors could lead all receivers in fantasy points next season. I mean, you're just loaded with first-round talent.
I think that was my only question was Malik Neighbors. Is like, was there any quarterback concern with you putting him inside the top 10 here, Mike?
Get better, right?
No, it has to be better than this year, and he was led the NFL in targets and target share as a rookie. And if you look at players with 160-plus targets, not just rookies, 160-plus targets in a season over the last decade, the worst player is Deontay Johnson, and it's a sizable drop from him to the next best. Like, it is all superstars. I mean, that is a pretty good indicator that this guy is going to be an elite receiver for a long time. So I feel great about his situation. Just, that's unreal. You lead the NFL in targets as a rookie. Here he is going into Week 18. Yes,
and they should keep him busy this week.
Yes. Yep. All right, let's look at positions 11 through 20 for 2025. Speaking of elite wide receivers, Brian Thomas Jr. comes in at 11.
I thought on him in a second.
Then A.J. Brown, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and the aforementioned Devon Achane rounds out the top 15. 16 through 20, Josh Jacobs, who got a ton of work this year for the Packers. Christian McCaffrey, going to be a very interesting conversation in 2025. Bucky Irving as 18, JSN at 19, and Kyron Williams at 20. Field, knowing this is Mike's list, what kind of stands out to you about 11 to 20 here?
The running backs becomes really, really difficult there. It becomes super tough.
I'll comment on that in a second.
Yeah, I mean, Breece Hall, you could easily make the case, belongs lower than all those players you have there, right? Like, I think right now, if you ask me, between Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane, Christian McCaffrey, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, Kyron Williams, I might prefer Breece Hall least out of all those guys.
Interesting.
There's a case to. And I know that, like, he was the supernova player last year, right? He was RB2 last season, so he was incredible.
Yeah.
So much, though, is dependent in the case of Breece Hall on the Jets offseason.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I'm kind of being a little conservative here. I mean, maybe it's a little aggressive, but I still believe in the talent of this player. And again, we've seen it. We saw it last year, what he can do.
He's amazingly talented, yeah.
So I'm still kind of buying into that, but you're right. He's one that could move up, maybe up, perhaps down based on what happens in the offseason. I do have 2 running backs here who are under, 195 pounds, which makes me a little nervous. I'll tell you what.
Irving and Achane, yeah.
Yeah, Devon Achane, the circumstances were just perfect for him to have a big year this year, but I'm a little nervous about him based on how dependent he was on Tua and that screen pass. I mean, you take that screen pass away, this was a disastrous year for him. And then Bucky Irving, same kind of thing. He's small, and when they've given him big workloads, he's gotten injured this year too. But the level of play for them, and maybe it's kind of a new era in the NFL, is why I feel a little better about them, at least at this point in the offseason.
Tell you what, Mike, I'm proud of you for coming around on this, because I asked you at some point during the season, I said, when you are thinking ahead to the offseason, and you're thinking about players who are so dependent upon their quarterback, like the Dolphins are, like Devon Achane is, do you feel like that's going to adjust your ranking at all? And you kind of just conceded that it did.
Being dependent on
Tua, there is 2 decided, Tua, maybe the Dolphins this offseason are more aggressive in filling their backup quarterback role because they've seen what a decided drop they get. But if they come back next year with a relatively nondescript quarterback too, then I'm going to be more concerned about Devon Achane than I am other players, because if Tua misses half the season, you have a player who is, at least based off of this year, from a results standpoint, unusable.
Yeah, I think range of outcomes is definitely something to consider. There's so many things to consider, though, with these guys. But again, I am nervous about it, not even for that reason, just because of the way he's built and how he got his fantasy points this season. It just makes me a little bit nervous, and kind of similar for Irving, just with his frame, But that's the question you have to ask yourself. Do you believe that these guys can sustain this at this size and have Achane or Kamara or, sort of seasons going forward? Even like Matt Forte, who was a guy that never really referenced him twice today, but not a big touchdown scorer often.
Yeah.
He did a lot as just a reliable, a lot of catches, enough carries sort of season. And maybe that's the nature of the NFL now. And by the way, I want to mention another guy here, Kyren Williams. Again, he's right on that cusp. He's not going to play this week, so he's at the very bottom. But I mentioned, what was my stat? 350 plus touches. He is 350. So he's right on that cusp and has 2 years now of high-end production, fairly healthy. Had an IR stint last year, but healthy all this year. But I think that it's going to be like the Cook-Madison backfield where, and I don't always say this because oftentimes you don't, other people should still be interested in Blake Corum next year because of Kyron's workload the last 2 years. But I feel like if you take Kyren next year, you definitely want Corum. And again, because it's straightforward. It's not always straightforward to get the insurance back, but as long as the ADP's not out of control, that's one of them backfields you're like, it makes sense here. It's rare it makes sense, but it makes sense here to get Blake Corum with Kyren next year.
2 quick thoughts before we get into the last 5 players, 21 through 25. 1, Brian Thomas Jr. was, in my opinion, the biggest Pro Bowl snub. I know that it's just an exhibition, but I believed he deserved to be in over Zay Flowers.
100%.
Sorry, Zay, I think that was, more catches, yards, and touchdowns.
Wild,
that, to me, with far inferior quarterback play. Zay's an incredible talent, but I thought Brian Thomas Jr. was a very worthy Pro Bowl selection, so shout out to Jaguars fans who feel the same way. And then second of all, I want to be the first person to say this because everybody's going to have the exact same thought. If Christian McCaffrey's ADP hovers around where Mike has him in the ranks right now, he'll be the most popular player. Everybody have the same thought. I want Christian McCaffrey at cost because let's be honest. Christian McCaffrey, if he's healthy, is better than everybody else on this list.
Yes, I agree 100%. He will most likely be a first-round pick if everything's clear and he's healthy. I did bump him a little bit just based on that risk going into the offseason. We don't know. And, we have to figure out in the offseason, if you take CMC, who you draft him late? Garendo, Jordan Mason?
I'm just going to follow Adam Schefter on Twitter.
Whatever he does.
Whatever he does in the War Room League.
I think it's Garendo.
I think it's Garendo.
I think it's Garendo as well. But, I'm with you. That one, he was one of the hardest players to rank because no doubt he could be first overall next year, or it could be just he's done.
Yeah.
But by the way, he's going to be 29. I think he is a year or 2 left.
I agree, and they're coming out for blood next year. They're coming out for blood. They really are.
Yeah, I think we will have him ranked higher than this.
I got one question before we move on, and then we'll look at 21 through 25 here. But in our YouTube chat, one of the questions that came up was, how you feeling about potential 0 RB next year, Mike? Have you started to look ahead at some of your draft strategies based on where you have your running back situation kind of filled out at the top?
I think it's always fine. If as long as you load up at the other positions, it's totally fine. But these aren't the guys you're getting if you're going zero RB. But we saw a lot of. You could have waited this year because of where guys like Alvin Kamara was going, right? Like he was one of my favorite targets this year in the 4th round, and which was odd for me because he's an older back. But those guys started to fall to a place where you're like, man, I could just skip running back and still get starters a little later. Kyron Williams obviously fell. So
James Conner, David Montgomery, there was a 100%. Bunch of guys.
So I think you could certainly pull that off. But again, that's the same as any year. If that's your strategy and you want to attack receiver early and then go cheaper running back, that's fine. One thing I do see, we'll see some regression in the mean next year is more running back injuries. We've seen them the last couple of weeks, but the position was healthy all year long. That's not going to be as strong of the case next year. It's just the reality of the situation. So, your Trey Bensons and Blake Corums and those kind of guys are going to get more run next year. It's just the reality.
Yeah. Do you know where you had James Cook at in this list? I was surprised. James Cook leads the NFL. He's not. I don't see him. When we get to 25, I don't have him in here, but he leads the NFL in touchdowns.
He's 26, RB 11 right now.
You go.
Yeah, but his expected touchdown total is like 8.
So he's way over his head.
Yes, and those guys always come back to earth the next year. It's just money in the bank.
Does he really lead the NFL in total touchdowns? James Cook?
James Cook has 17, more than any other running back or wide receiver in the NFL.
Dang, I didn't realize that. He also was not named to the Pro Bowl, and he was very upset about that this season.
Probably because he found the end zone 17 times and was like, I think I should be here, guys.
My rule in the Pro Bowl, though, is always this. If you're going to say someone's a snub, you got to remove somebody else.
Yes.
Right? So Brian Thomas Jr., I believe, deserved to be in over Zay Flowers, and I believe the Christian Gonzalez deserved to be in over Denzel Ward. Other than that, I thought it was a fairly representative list.
All right.
Those other guys are really talented, and they're great, but I just thought those two guys had superior seasons, in my opinion.
Let's look really quickly at positions 21 through 25 on Mike's way too early 2025 rankings.
Yeah.
At 21, we got Brock Bowers and then Trey McBride, 2 tight ends back-to-back.
Yeah, this was an interesting spot in the rankings
here.
And
tight end
I'll
1,
explain myself
tight end
here.
2. Number 23 is Josh Allen, first quarterback on this list. And then it's Lamar Jackson, the second quarterback on this list. And then old man Devontae Adams, you just can't quit him, Mike Clay.
Yeah, for now. That Rodgers to Adams connection, I'm just assuming for now that it's together. If it's not, we might have to change this up a little bit. I mean, Adams finished way up there in points per game again. Like, he had another great year. 32 years old, I think he'll have another good year. But this is where I started looking at tight end and quarterback. And my thought process here was tight end, we have Bowers and McBride, and then Kittle's not terribly far behind. I have him at 36 overall. But then it's like back to the old, like, a lot of question marks. You have Laporta, Njoku, Andrews, Kelsey, Hawkinson, Ingram. Like, it starts to be like, all right, those two, Bowers and McBride, they just feel like they really stand ahead. And then quarterback, I have 5 guys. I talked about this on FF Now Sunday. The most interesting question here is going to be like, do you go after one of the top 5 because they really stand above everyone else? And you saw Lamar, Allen, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, and Joe Burrow. Yep. And then it's like, who's 6? Is it Mahomes? Is it Mayfield? And that list can go on for another 20 names. Like, you have so many guys. So I think quarterback, those 5 will be up a little higher, and then there's going to be a huge gap because I think if you miss those 5, you're just like, I'll just wait. Like, I'll get someone late. I'll take a rookie, whatever it is. But I feel like there's tiers here at tight end and quarterback, and that's why I have them higher.